He bought a lonely cabin. The mountain's daughter waited there with a secret promise. John had never felt more exhausted in his life. Years of rushing through city streets, answering endless calls and attending meetings that never seemed to end, had worn him down completely. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. One evening, after another long day at work, he sat by the window staring at the distant mountains he could barely see through the city haze. He imagined being somewhere quiet, somewhere he could breathe and think without interruptions. That night, as he scrolled online, his eyes fell on a small cabin for sale in a remote mountain area. It was old and lonely, surrounded by tall pines and hills that seemed untouched by humans. On impulse, he clicked, "Contact seller." A few weeks later, John found himself driving along winding roads, the city shrinking behind him. Each mile away from the crowded streets seemed to lift a weight off his shoulders. The air grew cooler and fresher as he climbed higher. Pine trees lined both sides of the road, their scent sharp but calming. He noticed streams reflecting the sunlight like scattered diamonds and birds that seemed unbothered by his presence. It was a different world, silent, except for nature's sounds. He felt excitement mixed with nervousness. Buying the cabin had been spontaneous, but now that he was near, he wondered if he had made the right choice. When he finally arrived, the cabin appeared even smaller than the pictures had shown. Its wooden walls were weathered, gray with age, and moss had begun to cover parts of the roof. Yet, something about it felt inviting. It had stood there for decades, facing the valley below like a quiet guardian. John stepped out of his car, his boots crunching on the gravel, and ran his hands along the rough wooden wall. The air smelled of pine and earth, and he felt a strange comfort in the simplicity of it all. This place was far from the noise, far from demands, far from life's endless push. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of peace. Inside, the cabin was even more simple. A small kitchen with a rusted stove, a fireplace with charred logs, and a single room that served as living and sleeping space. Dust lay in corners and the floors creaked under his weight. Yet, he smiled. He didn't need luxury here. He needed silence, space, and time to think. As he unpacked a few things, he noticed small signs that someone had been here not too long ago. Fresh firewood stacked neatly by the fireplace and footprints in the dirt near the doorway. Strange, he thought. Heaven. The seller had assured him the place had been abandoned for years. Perhaps animals had wandered through, or maybe it was his imagination. That first night, John sat by the fireplace, listening to the wind rustling through the pines outside. He stared at the stars visible through the window. They were brighter than any he had seen in the city, and their vastness made him feel small but alive. The silence of the mountains was different from the silence of the city. In the city, silence was rare and uncomfortable. Here it was soothing, almost like a friend. Yet it was also a little lonely. The shadows of the room danced with the firelight, and he wondered if he would feel truly at home or just abandoned in the quiet. The next morning, John woke early to the sound of birds chirping. He stepped outside and took a deep breath, the cold mountain air filling his lungs. He walked around the cabin, exploring the small clearing it sat in. Wildflowers grew along the edges, and the stream he had noticed from the road ran nearby, its water clear and cool. He knelt and dipped his hands in, letting the chill wake him fully. Everything here felt alive yet untouched. He felt grateful for this chance to start over, even if only for a little while. Days passed, and John began to settle into the rhythm of the mountains. He chopped firewood, cleaned the cabin, and took long walks along hidden trails. He discovered a small field where the sun hit just right in the late afternoon. and he imagined planting vegetables there someday. He noticed that the footprints he had seen earlier appeared again, sometimes near the stream, sometimes closer to the trees. Whoever it was moved quietly and carefully, leaving no sign except the impressions on the dirt. John's curiosity grew, but he decided to wait. The mountains had taught him patience already. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and painted the sky orange and pink, John felt a sudden movement near the trees. He froze. A shadow flitted between the trunks, quick and light. His heart raced. He stepped forward cautiously, trying to see through the dim light. But there was nothing, just the forest, silent except for the rustling of leaves. He laughed softly at himself. Perhaps it was an animal, a deer or a fox. Or perhaps, he thought, it was the mountains themselves, reminding him that this world was alive in ways he could not always understand. Despite the occasional unease, John felt more alive than he had in years. He cooked simple meals, read books he had long ignored, and watched the sky change every day. Nights were quiet, but he didn't feel lonely. The mountains were company enough. He found himself talking aloud sometimes, to the trees or to the wind, sharing thoughts he had buried in city life. The freedom was liberating. Each day he discovered something new, a bird's song, a flower's bloom, a hidden path through the woods. Life was slow here, but it was real, and it mattered. One afternoon, as John repaired a small section of the cabin roof, he noticed someone approaching from the forest. A young woman stepped lightly down the path, her eyes scanning the surroundings carefully. She wore simple clothes that blended with the trees, and her hair was tied back in a braid. John froze, unsure if he should call out. The woman stopped a few meters away and smiled gently. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she nodded toward him, almost as if acknowledging his presence. John felt a strange calm, despite the surprise. There was something familiar in her eyes, something that made him feel that perhaps he was not as alone as he thought. The woman did not stay long that first day. She lingered just enough to observe him, then disappeared into the trees as silently as she had arrived. John's curiosity was piqued. Who was she? Did she live in the mountains? Was she alone like him? Or had she been here longer? Questions filled his mind, but he knew that answers would come with time. For now, he returned to chopping wood, feeling a quiet excitement he hadn't felt in years. The mountains were teaching him not just patience, but a sense of wonder he had forgotten. That night, John sat by the fire again, thinking about the day. The cabin felt more like home already. The presence of the stranger in the woods lingered in his mind, but instead of fear, he felt intrigue. Perhaps this was part of the life he had sought, a place where stories could unfold naturally, where human connections could appear in the quietest moments. He stared at the stars once more, feeling a small smile spread across his face. The mountains were alive, and so was he. For the first time in a long while, he felt ready for whatever might come next. The next morning, John woke to a gentle breeze that moved the pine branches outside his cabin. The sun was just beginning to peek over the mountain peaks, painting the forest in shades of gold and green. He stretched and stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air. Today, he decided he would explore a trail he had noticed the day before, one that led deeper into the forest. He wanted to feel the mountains more fully, to understand the place he had chosen as his refuge. As he walked along the narrow path, the sounds of the forest surrounded him. The soft trickle of a stream nearby, the distant call of birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. Every step seemed to bring a sense of calm he had not felt in years. After a while, he came across a small clearing where sunlight fell like a spotlight on the forest floor. In the center was a patch of wildflowers, blue and purple, swaying gently. John knelt to touch them, enjoying the softness of the petals and the coolness of the earth. It was peaceful, yet he felt a presence, an awareness that he was not entirely alone. Then he saw her again. The young woman from the other day stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a tall pine. And she was watching him, her posture relaxed, but alert. John froze, unsure what to do. His heart raced, but he reminded himself to stay calm. He smiled softly and waved. To his surprise, she waved back, just once, before retreating slightly behind the trees. John hesitated, but decided to follow at a careful distance. He moved quietly, stepping over roots and small stones, trying not to startle her. As he got closer, he noticed her features more clearly: dark, thoughtful eyes, skin tanned from the sun, and hair that fell in a braid over her shoulder. She was alone, yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in the mountains. John called out gently, "Hello, I'm John. I live in the cabin nearby." She paused, then stepped forward cautiously. "I know," she said softly, her voice calm but careful. "I've seen you before." She didn't offer more information, only watching him with quiet curiosity. John felt a mix of relief and intrigue. She wasn't frightened, but she wasn't openly friendly either. He nodded slowly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to explore a little." She tilted her head, considering him for a moment, and then nodded once. For the next few days, John noticed her in small, unexpected ways. Sometimes she left a basket of berries on his porch, carefully placed beside the door. Other times, he found a carved wooden figure on a log near the stream, delicate and precise. She never stayed to talk, but her presence was always gentle, like the mountains themselves. John's curiosity grew. He wanted to know who she was, why she lived so quietly, and what story she carried with her. Yet he also respected her distance. One afternoon, John decided to leave a small gift for her. He carved a simple wooden bird and placed it near the same stream where he had seen her last. He hoped she would find it and know it was from him, a small gesture of friendship. Later that day, he returned to the cabin and found that she had left something in return: a neatly folded piece of paper with careful handwriting. He opened it and read the words, simple but full of meaning: "Thank you. The mountains remember all who are kind." She was cautious, yes, but not unkind. Her gestures showed thoughtfulness and care, and he realized she had been living a life of solitude, not out of fear, but perhaps out of choice or necessity. The mountains had made her cautious but also attentive. He wanted to learn from her, to understand her world without disturbing it. Days turned into a week, and John continued his routine of chopping wood, exploring the trails, and observing the signs of her presence. He noticed a small garden hidden behind a cluster of trees, carefully tended with wild herbs and vegetables. Near it was a small cabin, older and simpler than his, almost camouflaged with the forest. He realized that she had made a life here, quietly and deliberately. It was a life built on patience and care, on understanding the land and its rhythms. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, John decided to leave a note for her. He wrote simply, "If you ever want to talk, I would like to understand your world. I mean no harm." He left it near the stream and returned to his cabin, heart beating fast with anticipation. That night he couldn't sleep. The thought of her, her quiet strength, and the mystery surrounding her promise filled his mind. He wondered what story had brought her to the mountains and why she chose to stay hidden. The next morning the note had disappeared, replaced by another message. "Meet me at the clearing by the wildflowers at noon. I will be there." John felt a thrill of excitement and nervousness. He washed quickly and made his way to the clearing, careful to avoid startling her. As he approached, he saw her standing among the flowers, calm and composed. She didn't smile, but her eyes showed a quiet acknowledgement. "Hello," John said softly. "Thank you for meeting me." She nodded, looking at him carefully. "I wanted to see if you were sincere," she said. "The mountains are not a place for careless visitors." John understood. She had lived here long enough to trust only those who respected her world. "I am sincere," he replied. "I only want to understand and maybe learn from you." She studied him, then slowly extended her hand. "I am Alara," she said. "I live here, but I do not often meet others." John shook her hand gently, feeling the strength and quiet determination in her grip. Over the next few hours, John and Alara walked together through the forest. She pointed out hidden paths, explained which plants could be used for food or medicine, and showed him places where the sun made the rocks warm for resting. She spoke little about herself, but through her careful instructions and the way she moved through the forest, John began to see her life in fragments. She was self-sufficient, strong, and intimately connected to the mountains. She had chosen this life, or perhaps it had chosen her. By the time they returned to the clearing, John felt a sense of closeness he hadn't expected. Ilara's cautious demeanor had softened slightly, and he realized that trust, once earned, could grow even in the most remote places. Before leaving, she said quietly, "The mountains teach patience. If you are willing to wait, they will reveal their secrets." John nodded, understanding more than she knew. He would wait, not just for her to reveal her story, but for the mountains to show him what life here could truly be. That evening, John returned to his cabin, his mind full of thoughts. The mountains were no longer just a refuge from the city. They were alive with stories, with hidden lives and quiet promises. Alara's presence reminded him that solitude did not mean loneliness, and that trust could be built slowly, like planting a seed and watching it grow. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for this unexpected friendship and for the mysteries that the mountains held. As he sat by the fire that night, he realized that his life had begun to change. The city, with its noise and endless demands, felt far away, almost like a dream. Here he could feel the rhythm of the world, the connection between people and nature, and the possibility of a story unfolding before him. The mountains had welcomed him, and in return he was learning to listen, observe, and respect their quiet wisdom. And somewhere nearby, Alara watched the sunset from her own small cabin. She sensed that John was different from others who had wandered into her world. There was patience in him, a gentle curiosity, and a willingness to observe rather than disrupt. She did not yet tell him her secret promise, but she felt that the time might come when he would be ready to understand. For now, she let him discover the mountains slowly, and she watched from a distance, quietly guiding him without his knowing. The days passed quietly in the mountains, each one unfolding with its own rhythm. John had begun to feel at home in the small cabin he had purchased, yet the forest and the surrounding peaks still held secrets he longed to understand. His connection with Alara had grown slowly, each meeting gentle and unhurried, like the flow of the nearby stream. She taught him how to recognize tracks of animals, which berries were safe to eat, and how to listen to the wind to predict weather changes. One morning, John noticed something unusual while walking along a familiar trail. A small piece of cloth caught on a bush, partially hidden under leaves. He bent to pick it up. It was soft, finely stitched, and looked old. Curious, he followed the trail further, his eyes scanning the ground. Soon he found more items carefully arranged: a broken wooden frame, a small metal locket, and fragments of what seemed to be old letters, half buried by the soil. Each piece appeared to belong to someone who had lived in these mountains long before him. The careful placement suggested a story, one that someone had tended to quietly over time. When he returned to the cabin, John found Alara waiting near the stream. She had a small basket of herbs beside her, and the sunlight glinted off her hair. Her calm presence always seemed to balance his restless curiosity. "I found something," John said, holding out the items. Alara's eyes widened slightly, but she did not seem angry. Instead, she nodded slowly. "You have discovered pieces of my past," she said softly. "They are not dangerous, but they are private. If you wish to understand, you must be patient." John agreed immediately. He wanted to understand, but he also wanted to respect her boundaries. Over the next few days, Alara led John to a hidden corner of the forest. The path was narrow, overgrown, and almost invisible unless one knew exactly where to step. At the end, they reached a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines and overlooking a sparkling stream that twisted through the valley below. In the center of the clearing was a modest stone structure, barely taller than a man, with walls covered in moss and vines. Inside were shelves, small containers, and old journals, some written decades ago. "This," Alara said quietly, "is where I keep what matters most to me. It has been here long before I arrived, and I have tended it ever since." John carefully examined the journals. They were filled with writings about life in the mountains, descriptions of weather, animals, and notes about people who had come and gone. Among the entries, one caught his attention. It spoke of a promise, a vow made long ago by someone who had hoped to return but never did. John looked at Alara, who met his gaze with steady eyes. "That promise," she said, "is why I remain here. It is not just a memory. It is a responsibility. I wait, I care, and I keep this place alive until that promise is fulfilled." John felt a deep respect for her. Living alone in the mountains was one thing, but to dedicate oneself to a promise for so long took courage and strength. He asked gently, "Do you think the person will return?" Alara paused, looking out at the forest. "I do not know," she said. "Sometimes hope is all we have, and sometimes hope is what keeps us alive. I tend this place not just for myself, but for the promise that once mattered to someone else." John nodded, understanding that this was more than a simple story. It was a life shaped by loyalty, patience, and quiet love. From that day, their bond deepened further. John became more attentive, learning not just the ways of the mountains, but the rhythm of Alara's life. They shared meals, simple and hearty, cooked over firewood and fresh ingredients gathered from the forest. Alara showed him how to preserve berries, make herbal remedies, and even carve simple tools from wood. John realized that her life, though isolated, was rich with knowledge and connection to the natural world. Each task she performed was deliberate, each movement careful, as if every action mattered. One afternoon, while they were repairing part of the cabin roof, John asked, "Alara, why do you stay here alone? You could live in a town or a village, have people around, and still keep this place safe." She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "This place chooses its people," she said. "I belong to the mountains, not to a town. I am free here, yet I am bound to a promise. Both are my life." John thought about this. Ein Bobby. The mountains were alive with lessons, and Alara had chosen to listen carefully to what they taught her. She had found a life that balanced solitude and purpose, and he admired that deeply. Over the next weeks, John discovered more about the items he had found earlier. The letters and locket belonged to a family who had once lived in the mountains. They spoke of love, loss, and hope. One letter, folded carefully and worn with age, contained words that mirrored Ilara's life. "If I do not return, may someone care for what I have left. May it live and grow until I am home again." John realized that her secret promise was tied to these people, though the details remained a mystery. She had taken it upon herself to protect their legacy, their memory, and the land they loved. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ilara spoke quietly about her past without revealing the full story. She had grown up near the mountains, learning from her parents the ways of the land. They had taught her to respect nature, to observe carefully, and to honor promises. When her parents passed away, she inherited not just the knowledge of survival, but also a responsibility she had not fully understood at first. Over time, she realized that keeping the cabin, tending the garden, and watching over the clearing was part of a larger duty, one that connected her to something greater than herself. John listened, captivated. He had never imagined that life could be so intertwined with the land, so tied to promises that spanned generations. He realized that the mountains were more than just scenery. They were witnesses, keepers of history, and silent teachers. Through Ilara, he began to see the depth of life beyond cities, beyond deadlines, beyond the surface of human existence. Every leaf, every stone, every stream had a story, and she had learned to listen. The days that followed were filled with shared work and quiet companionship. John and Ilara planted herbs together, collected firewood, and mapped trails through the forest. Occasionally, they would sit silently on a rock overlooking the valley, watching clouds drift across the peaks. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not. But the silence was comfortable, a shared understanding that words were not always necessary. John felt that he was learning not just about the mountains, but about patience, trust, and the value of keeping one's word. One afternoon, John found another journal, hidden beneath a stone near the stream. It was smaller, with pages worn from time and use. Inside were sketches of the forest, notes about the plants, and careful observations of the seasons. Among the entries was a passage that made his heart quicken. "One day someone new may come to this place. They will see what I have protected and understand its value. Until then, I wait." John looked at Ilara. She did not need to explain. He understood that he had arrived at the right time, not by chance, but because the mountains had opened the way. That night, as John sat by the fire in his cabin, he thought about the life he had left behind in the city. The mountains were teaching him lessons he had never learned in offices or busy streets. Here he could slow down, pay attention, and understand the meaning of commitment, care, and connection. Ilara's secret promise was no longer just her story. It was part of the rhythm of the mountains, and now part of his own life as well. He realized that some things were worth waiting for, worth protecting, and worth honoring. The mountains had given him solitude, and through Ilara, they were teaching him trust and purpose. For the first time in his life, John felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He understood that every footprint, every note, every carved figure had a meaning, and that stories could live quietly, waiting for someone to notice, respect, and continue them. The mountains had never felt so alive. John and Ilara had grown more comfortable in each other's company, moving through the forest with a quiet rhythm, tending the land and sharing small moments of laughter. Yet, the mountains were unpredictable, and life in such a remote place carried dangers that John had not fully understood until now. One morning, dark clouds gathered quickly over the peaks. The wind howled through the pines, carrying the scent of rain and the warning of a storm. John noticed the change first while gathering firewood near the stream. The air turned colder, heavier, and the shadows of the trees shifted in ways that felt urgent. He called to Alara, who was nearby, checking the garden. She glanced at the sky, her expression serious. "A storm is coming," she said calmly. "We must prepare." John had learned from her careful ways, so he immediately began securing the cabin. He stacked extra firewood inside, tied down the loose shutters, and checked the roof for weak spots. Alara moved with quiet efficiency, gathering herbs and food supplies and bringing water from the stream. Despite the rising wind, there was no panic, only purpose. She instructed John to stay close, to avoid wandering into the forest, and to keep the fire going. The mountains could be harsh, she reminded him, and storms here were not like the city rainstorms he had known. By late afternoon, the storm hit with full force. Rain fell in heavy sheets and the wind howled like a wild animal. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in sharp, fleeting flashes. John stayed close to the cabin, helping Alara reinforce the door against the wind. The storm made him realize how fragile human life could feel in the face of nature's power. He had come here seeking peace, but now he saw that the mountains demanded respect as much as they offered beauty. As night fell, the storm worsened. Thunder rolled through the valleys, shaking the ground beneath the cabin. John and Alara huddled near the fireplace, their small cabin illuminated by the flickering flames. "This is why we prepare," Alara said, her voice steady. "We respect the mountains, but we cannot control them. We must survive together." John nodded, feeling a mix of fear and trust. In that moment, he realized that their bond had become something deeper than curiosity or friendship. Survival required cooperation, patience, and confidence in one another. Hours passed with little sleep, each minute stretching in the sound of the storm. At one point, John heard a loud crash outside. A tree, uprooted by the wind, had fallen across part of the clearing. He rushed to check, and Alara followed. Together they assessed the damage. Thankfully, the cabin was unharmed, but the storm had altered the forest. Paths they had walked safely before were now blocked, and the stream had swollen, carrying debris from higher in the mountains. John felt the raw force of nature as never before. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the forest wet and glistening. Down knocks between 999. Sunlight broke through the clouds, reflecting on the wet leaves and water. Yet the damage was clear. Fallen branches blocked trails, small trees had been uprooted, and the stream had shifted course slightly. John and Alara worked together to clear the paths, repair the garden, and ensure that the cabins were stable. The work was exhausting, but it brought a sense of purpose and connection. They realized that nature was both beautiful and unforgiving, and that living here required respect, effort, and resilience. During a quiet moment as they rested on a log near the stream, John asked, "Have you faced storms like this before?" Alara nodded. "Many," she said softly, "but each one is different. The mountains are unpredictable, and they test us. But they also teach us to pay attention, to care, and to rely on those who matter." John thought about her words, realizing that their time together had prepared them for this. He had learned patience, observation, and care. But now he understood the deeper lesson. Connection could save lives, even in isolation. As they repaired the cabins, John noticed a hidden part of the forest where the storm had uncovered something remarkable. A small stone wall, partially buried by years of leaves and snow, now stood exposed. Alara recognized it immediately. "This is part of the old settlement," she said. "The family who made the promise I care for built this. It is fragile, but it has survived decades. We must protect it." John felt awe at the history before him. Elara had not only dedicated her life to keeping the land alive, but also to preserving the memory of people long gone. Their legacy was now intertwined with her own, and now with his as well. That evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Elara began to share more of her story. She spoke of her childhood in the mountains, learning survival skills from her parents, and the lessons of patience and respect they had instilled. Then she told him about the promise. Years ago, someone had asked her to care for a cabin, a garden, and the land around it if they could not return. She had accepted, not fully understanding the responsibility at first. Over time, she realized the depth of the promise and the importance of honoring it. John listened carefully, realizing that her life had been shaped by loyalty, care, and the mountains themselves. The storm had brought them closer. John now saw that living in the mountains was not just about peace or escape. It was about facing challenges, respecting nature, and building trust. Elara's dedication had created a world of order and care, and now he was part of it. Together, they understood the importance of patience, foresight, and shared responsibility. John felt a deep respect for her and for the mountains that had shaped both their lives. In the following days, they continued their work. Paths were cleared, gardens restored, and the old stone wall reinforced. The storm had changed the forest, but it had also strengthened their bond. They laughed together as they carried logs, joked about small mistakes, and shared meals by the fire. John realized that the mountains could be harsh, but they also allowed for moments of joy and connection, if one was willing to pay attention and work with care. One afternoon, while exploring a newly cleared trail, John found another set of footprints. Unlike the tracks of deer or birds, these were human, fresh but careful, as if someone had been observing them. He followed them cautiously and noticed Elara standing nearby, watching him with a faint smile. "The mountains are full of secrets," she said. "Sometimes people come and go, sometimes they leave without notice, and sometimes they return." John felt a thrill of curiosity. The promise, the history, and the mysteries of this place seemed larger than either of them alone. As evening approached, the two returned to the cabin. The storm had left the air crisp and clear, the forest alive with new sounds, dripping water, rustling leaves, and distant calls of animals that had been hidden during the storm. John felt a deep sense of belonging. The city, with its noise and endless demands, felt like a distant memory. Here he had purpose, connection, and the chance to witness life in its purest form. The mountains were not just a refuge, they were a teacher, and Elara was guiding him through lessons he could not have imagined. That night, they sat by the fire and watched the stars. The storm had passed, leaving the sky clear and vast, the Milky Way stretching across the darkness like a river of light. John felt a sense of peace and wonder, but also awareness. Life here was beautiful but fragile. The mountains demanded respect, preparation, and humility, and in the quiet moments, he realized something profound. Connection, trust, and care were as essential to survival as firewood or shelter. Elara had lived this lesson for years, and now he was learning it too. John understood that storms would come again, challenges would arise, and life would test them. But he also knew that together they could face whatever the mountains sent their way. Their bond was no longer just curiosity or fascination. It was trust forged through shared effort, shared danger, and shared respect for the land. The mountains had brought them together, tested them, and now were shaping them into something stronger than either had imagined. The days following the storm were quiet, almost serene. The forest had recovered quickly, the stream now flowing smoothly over stones polished by the rushing water. John and Alara worked together to restore the small garden and repair the minor damages the storm had caused. Yet, there was a sense in the air, a feeling that something important was about to unfold. John noticed the way Alara moved with more purpose than usual, her eyes scanning the forest as if she expected someone or something to appear. One afternoon, as John carried a stack of firewood to the cabin, he noticed footprints in the softened earth near the stream. They were human, larger than either of theirs, and fresh. He called to Alara, who approached quickly, her face calm but alert. "Someone is coming," she said softly. "I have been waiting for this day, but I do not know if they will return as I hope." John felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. For years she had lived in solitude, caring for a place tied to a promise. And now, perhaps, the fulfillment of that promise was near. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, a figure appeared on the trail. An older man with careful steps and a weathered face walked slowly toward the cabin. John and Alara watched him from a distance, unsure what would happen next. When he reached the clearing, Alara stepped forward, her posture calm yet filled with anticipation. The man paused, his eyes meeting hers, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You have kept it safe," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I see that the promise has been honored." Alara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She nodded, but did not speak immediately. The man looked around at the clearing, the stone wall, and the small cabin she had maintained. "I could not return when I had intended," he continued. "But you have cared for this place, as I had hoped someone would? The promise is complete." John watched silently, realizing the depth of what had just occurred. For years, Alara had dedicated herself to this promise, shaping her life around it. And now, after all that time, the burden she carried could finally rest. The man spent the afternoon in the clearing, sharing stories of the past, of the family who had once lived here, and the promise that had been made. John listened carefully, fascinated by the history and the weight of dedication it carried. He saw how much it meant to Alara, how the mountains had shaped her life, and how she had, in turn, shaped the forest and the cabin. When the man departed at sunset, John and Alara returned to the cabin together. For the first time in years, she moved with a lightness that surprised John, a quiet relief and a newfound peace in her steps. That night, John and Alara sat by the fire, watching the stars appear one by one. "It is done," she said quietly. "The promise is fulfilled, and yet I feel the mountains still have lessons for me. I have given care, patience, and trust, and in return, I have learned that life is not only about waiting, but about living fully in each moment." John smiled, feeling the truth of her words. He had come seeking peace, but he had found far more: purpose, friendship, and a deep understanding of human connection intertwined with nature. Over the following days, the mountains seemed to glow with a renewed calm. John and Alara continued their work, but now it felt lighter. They planted new herbs, cleared old paths, and restored parts of the forest trail. The clearing became a place not just of duty, but of joy. John realized that Alara's life had been shaped by a promise, but now it could expand beyond obligation. She could explore the mountains for herself, enjoy their beauty, and share it with him without the weight of a long-held duty pressing on her. As they worked together, John began to understand the full impact of the promise and its fulfillment. It was not just a story of waiting, but of perseverance, dedication, and integrity. Elara had shaped her life around a commitment she had not chosen lightly, and in doing so, she had become part of something larger than herself. John felt humbled by her strength, inspired by her patience, and grateful for the chance to witness it. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on a large rock overlooking the valley. The air was cool, and the forest below glimmered in the last light of day. John spoke quietly. "I never imagined that a place could carry so much history, so much meaning. And I never imagined that someone could dedicate their life with such care." Elara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "The mountains teach us many things," she said. "They teach patience, respect, and the value of promises. But they also teach us to live, to notice beauty, and to share it when we can." John nodded, understanding more than words could express. Their time together had taught him lessons he could never have learned in the city. He had learned to slow down, to observe, to respect life in all its forms, and to value trust and dedication. He realized that the mountains were not just a refuge, they were a teacher, and Elara had been his guide. In the days that followed, life settled into a peaceful rhythm. John and Elara explored more of the trails, discovered hidden streams, and learned to predict the weather from the wind and clouds. They shared stories by the fire, laughed at small mistakes, and celebrated minor successes, like the first harvest of herbs or the return of a bird that had nested nearby. The cabin no longer felt lonely. It was alive with activity, connection, and the warmth of companionship. One afternoon, as they walked along a newly cleared trail, John noticed a small nest in a pine tree, carefully built with twigs and moss. A pair of birds chirped softly inside, feeding their young. He paused, watching the delicate scene, and realized that life in the mountains was always moving forward. The promise had been fulfilled, yes, but life continued, shaped by care, attention, and shared effort. Elara stood beside him, her presence quiet but strong, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons she had taught him. That evening they returned to the cabin tired but content. They prepared a simple meal, sharing it by the fireplace, and talked about the future. For the first time there was no weight of duty pressing on Elara. She could explore, enjoy, and live for herself while continuing to care for the mountains. John knew that his own life had changed as well. He had come seeking solitude, but he had found friendship, purpose, and a connection to the world that went deeper than anything he had known. As night fell, they stepped outside to look at the stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, brighter than John had ever seen in the city. The forest was quiet, alive only with natural sounds, and the mountains seemed to hum with a gentle energy. John felt a sense of completeness, as if he had arrived at a place where the past, present, and future all existed in harmony. Elara stood beside him, and for the first time she smiled fully, unburdened by the promise that had once guided her life. In the weeks that followed, John and Elara continued their life in the mountains, each day bringing new discoveries and quiet joy. The cabin became more than a refuge. It became a home, a place where they could learn, grow, and experience the full richness of life in harmony with nature. John often thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the crowded city streets to this peaceful clearing in the mountains. He realized that sometimes life's greatest gifts came from unexpected places, and that trust, patience, and care could transform not only the land, but the heart. And so, the lonely cabin that John had purchased became a place of life, laughter, and connection. The mountains had tested them, taught them, and guided them. The secret promise that Elara had kept for so many years was fulfilled, but its impact went far beyond the act itself. It had shaped a life, created a bond and brought meaning to the quiet corners of the forest. John and Alara knew that the mountains would continue to teach them, but they also knew that together they could face anything and that the future was bright with possibilities. The stars shone above, the forest whispered its gentle secrets, and the cabin stood strong, a symbol of care, patience, and fulfilled promises. Life in the mountains was not always easy, but it was full of wonder, connection, and lessons that could never be learned elsewhere. John had come seeking peace, and he had found it, along with friendship, purpose, and a story that would stay with him forever.